treated the ailing mother of my ex-husband as if she were my own. However, I was disowned after my ex-partner deceived her and told falsehoods about me taking money while depleting her resources. Me, 27, am a mother of two who was just divorced. I got married to my 27-year-old ex-husband Dylan 5 years ago, and we got divorced last year. Over the past few months, I've dealt with a lot of issues, including the divorce, the kids, and my ex-Mill's condition. Prior to my ex-Mill showing up at my home a few days ago, I was doing my best to handle it. I'm sorry for everything. I'll catch you all up. I've known Dylan since we were young children. Our mothers were truly the closest of friends. They had attended school, grown up together, been married, and had children about the same time. It was one of those uncommon connections that only happen once in a lifetime. As we say these days, they were each other's ride or die. Dylan and I obviously became very close as well. Our mothers would alternately drop us off at practice and pick us up from school, and they would also take us on playdates. It seemed like we had two moms who loved and cared for us equally as we were growing up. Dylan and I were always paired together when we were kids. People seemed to have a premonition that we would end up together. Not to add that our mothers constantly made jokes about it. They used to joke that if Dylan and I dated, it would finally bring them together. Since I had a serious crush on Dylan, I would blush every time they made fun of us, so I really detested it when they did that. To be honest, 8-year-old me would never have believed that our parents were right and that we would truly end up together, especially since it was obvious that he was more interested in cars and basketball than he was in me. If the 8-year-old version of myself had known how our love ended, she most likely would have suffered a stroke as well. My 63-year-old ex-Mill, Glenda, was like a second mother to me. I would spend most of my time at Glenda's house after school because my mom worked a lot and returned home late. She would always refer to me as the daughter she never had because she had always desired a daughter and had only Dylan. As a mother, I genuinely adored her. Every Christmas, she would purchase me my favorite sweets. Because of the way she was, I had no doubt that she would knit me a new cardigan. Everything was wonderful until my mother was 14 years old and diagnosed with cancer. We were all taken aback by the news, and I recall feeling as though my entire world was falling apart at that moment. With the cancer discovered too late to be treated effectively, all that was left to be done was hope and pray for the chemotherapy to be effective. My mother withered before my eyes over the following 2 years. It pained me to see her fading away since I was so accustomed to her being so vibrant and full of life. She started losing all of her hair and attended all of her chemotherapy sessions. She became quite thin and lost a lot of weight. I was a complete disaster at this time. Glenda was the one person I could talk to about my worries about my mum since I knew she was one of the few people who truly understood. My dad hardly had time for melancholy. The last thing I wanted to do was add to his already heavy workload while he was working extra hours to pay for all of the medical bills. Glenda handled everything. She took on the role of my mother's carer, making sure I could concentrate on my studies and not worry about anything. Everything was made by her. Ensured that my mother took her medication and that, in light of the circumstances, I was doing as well as I could. When I was 16, my mother peacefully died away in the company of all her loved ones after fighting cancer like a warrior for 2 years. One of the worst days of my life was that one. I still recall thinking that I would never be content again because my dearest buddy had passed away. Glenda, my dad, and I all wept together. Glenda was my rock through it all. After my mum passed away, I seemed to have stopped eating, taking showers and attending school for a few weeks. My mother would never want to see me like this. Glenda assured me as she sat me down, and if she didn't do anything to lift my spirits, she would condemn her from heaven. I hadn't smiled in months until that moment. Over the course of the following few years, I made Glenda's my daily hangout. She was one of the few people I loved and trusted, and she always knew how to cheer me up. Dylan and I grew closer still. I blame the adolescent hormones, but even though he was in his bad boy period and hanging out with the wrong crowd, for some reason this made him even more attractive to me. He started showing interest in me as well, which made me feel really flattered. When we started dating, it was obvious that we were starting to feel something for one another, but even at that early stage, I felt like I loved him more than he loved me. Private, we would be together all the time, but in public he would act quite cold towards me. He would not stop telling me how much he loved me, and how he intended to marry me when we were older, so I didn't mind too much. Ladies, take note, this kind of behavior is a huge warning sign. A man who genuinely cares for you won't feel ashamed to flaunt you in public. I experienced this firsthand. Sometimes, when Dylan ignored me, I did feel guilty. I thought I wasn't deserving enough for him to embrace me completely. Whether he liked me determined my whole sense of worth. Once more, this is a really dangerous way of thinking. Never judge your value by the opinions of others other than yourself. For a full 2 years, we were dating in secret. and there were numerous occasions when I wanted everyone to know that we were together. Whenever I would become upset with Dylan for flirting with another female in front of me, he would tell me that I was making a big deal out of it, and that he was only trying to maintain his reputation. It makes me sad to think how little I thought of myself, looking back at his behavior. I still felt extremely vulnerable emotionally, and he gave me the solace I needed. I didn't want to let him go, because there were moments when he made me feel good, so I ignored all of his warning signs and let him abuse me. So innocent of me, I ought to have known better. I was so tired of being ignored when we were 19 that I virtually begged him to come out with our relationship in public. It took him ages to agree. When Glenda learned, she was ecstatic. She gave me a hug and told me that fate had always meant for us to be together. Although Glenda was aware that her son wasn't the best and was hanging out with the wrong crowd, she secretly believed that having a relationship with him would make him change. Sincerely, I had the same thoughts. I genuinely think that I could transform Dylan and improve him as a person. Dylan continued to drink, dropped out of high school, and was never able to hold down a job for longer than a few months at a time. The majority of his time was spent socializing with his gang associates. Having known him for a long time, I thought he still had hope for a better life, and I thought that being in a committed relationship with me would help him get his act together. I made a big mistake. Dylan would always turn back to his old habits, no matter how hard I tried to help. He would often receive employment interviews from me, but he would never show up. I signed him up for classes to help him become more skilled, but he never showed up. I tried sending him to treatment to help him kick the habit, but it didn't work. I was in college at the time, working 2 jobs to make ends meet for the 2 of us. Dylan's actions caused Glenda to be stressed all the time. She was constantly frightened about what might happen to us, and, at one point, even thought he might hurt himself. After another year, Dylan's situation deteriorated much further. Just when I was starting to consider ending things, everything shifted in our lives. Glenda had an episode of cardiac arrest. We hurried to the hospital after I received a call in the middle of the night. She was stable, by God's grace, and required a few days of hospitalization. After doing a few more tests, they discovered that she had extremely high blood pressure and coronary heart disease. She also experienced arrhythmias, a cardiac rhythm issue that might be catastrophic if left untreated. She was fortunate to be alive, the doctors claimed. She was so sick that I was astonished, but I thanked the Lord that she was okay. The doctor put her on a strict diet. She had to take a ton of drugs and engage in a specific quantity of physical activity each day. The doctor's primary advice to us was that she shouldn't put herself under any stress because that could create another arrhythmia, and she wouldn't be as fortunate. Her heart was very delicate. All I could do was be happy she was still alive. Dylan had nothing, therefore I was the one who had to cover all of the hospital bills. Since I would do everything for her, I didn't mind. Dylan changed significantly once we got her back home, as far as I was concerned. This whole affair, in my opinion, was a wake-up call for him. I could see that the idea of losing his mother had absolutely rocked him, and that he had changed irrevocably. He began lending a daily hand to his mother, secured a job, and began making his fair part of the rent and expenditures. His perspective on me also shifted. He was treating me like a queen, bringing me on dates, and showing me so much love for the first time. The nicest thing that had come out of this terrifying event for any of us was that Dylan had changed for the better. Glenda was well cared for by Dylan and myself in the months that followed. We went her for checks to make sure everything was well and made sure she maintained her schedule, so Dylan's level of involvement thrilled me. I was drawn to him even more at this point. Dylan proposed to us when we were 21. Yes, I replied. And we tied the knot a year later. I clearly recall Glenda's speech during the wedding. She was ecstatic. She remarked that, even though she had always considered me to be her daughter, she was overjoyed that I was now officially Dylan's wife. She remarked that my mother would have been happier than ever if she had seen this, and that was the only thing she wished for. In the same year I graduated, I was able to get a position with a firm that paid fairly well. Compared to my flat with Dylan, which was closer to Glenda, it was quite a distance. I didn't want to move too far away from her, but the commute was becoming too boring for me, so we agreed it would be better if we moved into a flat nearer to my place of employment. We moved the next year because Glenda was totally on board. I made the decision to always have a carer with Glenda, since I was still uncomfortable being so far away from her. Although it was pricey, it provided me with comfort. It was the best year of our marriage. I adored Dylan in his updated and better form. Despite making far less money than I did, he assisted with all the bills. He was really helpful and performed things. The icing on the cake was that he was more romantic than ever. We became pregnant in less than a year. I felt safe enough to have a baby, which surprised me a little since it was still very early in our marriage. Being a grandmother delighted Glenda. Mary, my first daughter, was born, and we began our transition into motherhood. Parenting is not an easy job these days. It's a lifetime commitment, and there are undoubtedly challenges at first. My daughter and I clicked right away, and I didn't mind the smelly diapers or the restless nights. I relished every minute of it. Dylan, though, found it difficult to adjust. He did not contribute much to her daughter's care after she was born. All of the work was done by me. He claimed that this was not what he had signed up for, and that he was afraid to hold her when I challenged him about it. He claimed to be unaware of how much effort babies actually required. He was acting so immaturely, and I was shocked because I already had a lot on my plate. Significant arguments resulted from his lack of interest in caring for Mary. I took care of her by myself at one point after deciding there was no use in arguing. To exacerbate the situation, Dylan lost his job. Rather than seeking out a new one, he resumed his previous habits and began spending time at home. This time he disregarded Mary entirely and gave up on the household duties. We were so in need of the money that I had to return to work early on my maternity leave. Dylan was at home, but he didn't want to watch Mary, so I had to get a babysitter. We couldn't afford this additional cost, but we had no other choice. I considered asking Glenda to assist with baby care, but I didn't want to add to her already excessive stress. Dylan resumed his drinking. He would return home completely lost and unable to speak. I tried sending him to therapy, AA meetings, and everything else once again, but nothing seemed to work. My patience was wearing thin because he was failing to land a job. The most devastating news was learning that I was carrying another child. We had no intention of having another child, and we couldn't afford it. We were barely getting by since I was the only one working. Not that I wasn't paying bills and rent, I was also covering Dylan's therapy, Glenda's carer, and the babysitter. I was exhausting myself, and Dylan was not trying at all to change. Our marriage was in serious trouble right now, and I regretted getting married to him. Several times I thought about telling Glenda everything. She'd always had the greatest advice for me. I remained silent because I knew the doctor had advised not putting her under any stress and that these issues would cause her extreme worry. I pretended that everything was all right every time she called. Dylan also acted in a way that did not agitate her since he was smart enough not to. But he wasn't mature enough or prepared for the responsibilities that come with being a husband and father. Dylan had become worse, and there was another baby on the way. He told me to get rid of the baby and claimed that everything had been a great mistake. Even to hear him propose that made me shudder. Sure, having 2 children was going to be challenging, but if he took the initiative and found employment, things would be much simpler. We were constantly fighting. Most days he would not return home, and the awful atmosphere at home was starting to have an impact on Mary. When I discovered he was having an affair with our babysitter, I hit my breaking point. Neither surprise nor hurt did I feel. He and I both had lost our love for one another. Knowing that I had provided him with a roof over his head and paid all of his bills was the only reason he was even with me. I didn't need him, in fact. My life would be better without him using me for his own gain. He needed me. He didn't appear to be at all embarrassed about cheating on me. I wished I had parted ways with him long ago because he was a pitiful excuse for a guy. He was repulsive in every way. I chose to cut ties with him. This time I had had enough. He objected, stating that he needed me when all he needed was my money. He was my greatest regret in life, and I no longer felt any feelings for him. After a while, he dropped the act and told me that his mother had approved of me as a safe choice, which was the only reason he married me. He married me in order to finally get his mother off his back. Though, to be honest, I didn't care that he was attempting to harm me. When he went with the babysitter, I was relieved since I was so tired of him. My younger daughter was born, and we started the divorce process. It was fortunate that Dylan didn't want custody of the 2 children, because he couldn't possibly care for them. To be honest, I could get by without him, but it would be foolish of me to turn out more money. He had a nasty surprise when he learned that he would still be required to pay child support for both of them. After the divorce was finalized, we moved out on our own. As for other news, Glenda was clueless. Despite all of our efforts, her condition was becoming worse, and she was still healing from an angioplasty that she had recently had. Dylan and I agreed that we wouldn't discuss the divorce with her until we were certain she could handle it. Life was so much easier when Dylan was not around. I was able to find a nanny for both of the children, and I immediately started working following my maternity leave in order to increase my income. Dylan was just an extra burden that was weighing me down, I started to realize. I was able to preserve both my financial stability and my sanity without him. My children and I were doing well. I had heard that Dylan was close to ending his relationship with his girlfriend, and still didn't have a job. Even though he was having financial difficulties paying child support, he was no longer an issue for me. Glenda wasn't doing all that well, so I somehow persuaded her that everything was okay, and she bought it. I received a call from the bank a few months later informing me that Glenda's account was being withdrawn more frequently. She hardly ever made any withdrawals, much less several times a week for months, even though I would normally add a set amount of money to her account each month. She kept all of her life savings in there, and I knew she would have alerted me to any unforeseen costs. When I went to the bank, they informed me that Dylan's account was the only one where the money had been taken out and put. This pitiful man was robbing his own mother, and I was incensed. Glenda was unaware that her credit was being taken out. I asked the bank to stop Glenda from making any additional withdrawals from her account, until she did so personally and went straight to his house. When I questioned him, he told me to shut up since the money belonged to his mother, and he was free to spend it any way he pleased. I informed him that I was the one making the deposits into her account, and that he had no authority to access her funds, particularly without her consent. When he started acting aggressively and called me derogatory names, I told him that I had blocked the account and that he would no longer be able to access it. Instead of living off his sick mother, I advised him to acquire a job and pay for his girlfriend with his own money. I received the worst phone call of my life just over a week later. It came from Glenda. Her sorrowful demeanor was unheard of to me previously. Permit me to briefly summarize. Dylan got really mad at me for preventing him from accessing his Glenda's account. He played the victim and broke his word not to involve her in our affairs. When he first met Glenda, he told her a ton of lies. He told her he'd spent all his savings and that I'd made him have children. He also claimed that I was the one who mistreated and continually cheated on him. Upon reaching his breaking point and proposing a breakup, I vowed to fabricate a series of falsehoods about him to give Glenda a heart attack and finally get rid of her. Dylan chose to stay in this miserable marriage because he was afraid for his mother's life. That he had stopped to this extent surprised me. Turning the cards over, he made himself feel bad. Furthermore, he called the bank to verify the withdrawals and informed Glenda that I was the one taking money each month from her account. Oh, and even though he begged me to share custody with him, I had taken his children away. Yes, he truly is the worst. Glenda believed him when he went and told her all these lies. She called me up and said she was embarrassed that she had ever considered me to be a daughter, and that she had no idea that I was such a horrible person. The statement that my mother would have been extremely disappointed in me if she had been living was the one that wounded the most. She said that it was understandable that Dylan chose to have an affair and leave me because I was such a pitiful wife. She claimed I deserved it, and that she agreed with it. Finally, she hung up after declaring that she would never want to see my face again. I knew Glenda wouldn't take the truth, even though I really wanted to tell her. She was already really shocked by the whole situation, and I felt that if she experienced any more stress, she might actually pass away. I remained silent. I said nothing at all. Whether or not she considered me a villain was irrelevant. So be it if my nasty behavior is what kept her alive. I kept my mouth shut and complied with all Glenda ordered because I loved her too much to have her die at my hands. I would stop at nothing to keep her safe. After a heated debate with Dylan about it, I decided to go with my piece. I reasoned that there was no use disputing with such a moron, as he would only generate additional issues. I started moving on with my life and concentrating on my career and children, even though it stung to not talk to Glenda anymore. I hadn't spoken to Glenda in almost 9 months until this past week. The hospital called to inform me that Glenda had had a stroke and needed to talk to me right away. I took off for the hospital. Glenda appeared so frail. Although the physicians warned that the stroke might have been fatal, the patient's carer intervened quickly to save her life. With tears in her eyes, Glenda gave me a look that told me she knew the truth. She told me she was sorry, but she was having trouble even speaking because of all the tubes. She apologized for always putting her trust in Dylan rather than in me. It seemed like Dylan had taken all of Glenda's savings and spent them in the last 6 months. Even the cost of her hospital stay was beyond her means. She confronted Dylan and demanded an explanation after learning that her money was being taken out. She didn't trust him when he denied everything and blamed me. At last he acknowledged everything. He claimed to have spent all of her money and to have lied to her about me. Glenda stated that she was so nervous after hearing everything that she wanted to run to see me, but she passed out and was taken to the hospital. She called me to apologize as soon as she was conscious again. The amount of a loser Dylan was astounded me. Glenda didn't have to apologize. I assured her my only motivation for keeping the truth from her was to keep her safe. She argued that she wasn't deserving of my generosity and that she ought to have known all along that Dylan was the source of our marital problems. I assured her that I would always be there for her and that she didn't need to worry about anything. She remains in the ICU as of right now. Although she is improving, we are unsure about her future. Dylan is too embarrassed to even look at himself. Every day I go to her, and I can hardly afford the bills. Is this anything foolish of me to do? Shall I simply bring her home and let her to live out her final days in peace? How should I approach Dylan, too? I just need a break since I'm so stressed. Hello, first update. Whoa. I'm getting a lot of abuse on this site from people calling me names. Yes, I was foolish to stay with Dylan longer. You think I don't know that? You guys are acting so needlessly harsh about the wrong things. Dylan genuinely instigated his mother's stroke, yet you all seem to be ignoring that fact and holding me accountable for insignificant incidents. Please give up. I already have far too much on my plate. I appreciate all of the encouraging remarks I've received. You have no idea how much that means to me. Let me give you an update. I haven't written in about a month. Glenda continues to cling on. However, it appears as though her heart is ready to fail. She continues to have high blood pressure and is under frequent observation. At last, Dylan realized his mistake and expressed regret for everything. He has already ruined all of our lives, so it wouldn't really matter. I'm really uncomfortable staring at him. I told him unequivocally that I would call the police, and he would be in even more trouble if he didn't return all of the money he had taken from Glenda's account. I understand Dylan doesn't want the police getting involved because he has a history of offenses. He has so far kept his word to assist with the medical expenditures. The least he can do is contribute to everything that he has been doing. Glenda won't let him see her. She claims that she gets hypertension just thinking about him. Despite everything Glenda is going through, she continues to put up a brave face. She completely brightened up, even though it was only for a short while, when I was able to bring the kids to see her yesterday. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the situation doesn't seem positive. I would love it if you could hope and pray with us as well. Update 2. Hi there, everybody. I sincerely appreciate all of your kind words and prayers. We're all happy that Glenda is making significant progress and is now discharged from the intensive care unit. She can now be discharged from the hospital, according to the physicians. Our prayers have all been answered. Next week, she is scheduled to be released. Though she still poses a serious risk and has limited time left, she is becoming more resilient and determined to get out of the hospital than ever. When the time comes, she claims she wants to be at home with her grandchildren, rather than tethered to a machine or tube. Remarkably, Dylan was able to return all of the money he had stolen. I have no idea how long this act will continue on this occasion. Since we are all aware of how it ended the last time, he experienced the same thing. In any case, Glenda and him are still at odds. She will never be able to forgive him, in my opinion. Dylan seems to be at last repenting of his actions, but to be honest, I'm tired of extending my patience with him. All he is doing is dealing with the fallout from his own deeds. In any case, I will update everyone. Update 3. Hello everyone. I apologize for the long lapse in my last update. Since I haven't been active on here, I've been seeing a lot of comments asking how Glenda is doing and whether everything is okay. No, Glenda is not dead, she is okay. She is still very much alive, despite what I saw in so many of the comments claiming that she had passed away. Also, I've had a lot of comments requesting that I launch a GoFundMe page to raise money for her medical care. I agree with the sentiment, but I won't be accepting donations for Glenda. Fortunately, I have enough money to pay all of her bills. In any case, I appreciate your kindness and encouragement. Glenda is doing well, as I mentioned. She moved in with me and the kids at our flat after being released from the hospital a few months ago. A full-time nurse has been recruited by me to keep an eye on her while I'm away. It's great that the nurse assists with the children as well. I'm not sure what's causing Glenda's improvement, but perhaps being with her grandchildren is the cause. Whatever the case, I'm very relieved she's all right. She's even playing with the girls and strolling about. Every time I see them together, it makes me cry, and I want to capture that moment in time. To be honest, it's a wonder we have her at all. Even though the doctors had warned us there was little possibility she would be released, she is still doing well. Since her release, we have become inseparable. It seems like she is making up for missed time. Having her makes me very happy. She told me last week that she should have known all along that I was shielding her, since my mother would have done the same thing. I almost went bald. Dylan comes around once in a while, but we don't mind. He's making an effort to get to know the girls, but as soon as he acts strange, he will cut off contact. I cannot allow children to experience the trauma I have. Although Dylan and I don't get along, I won't stop him if he wants to become a decent father. Right now, everything appears to be in order, and we're living day by day. If you could just continue to pray for Glenda, that would be greatly appreciated.